So how does a handful of colonies turn into a global superpower? The story of the United States, it's not some simple, straightforward tale of progress. Not at all. It's a story that was literally shaped, and yes, scarred, by a series of really brutal foundational conflicts. We're talking fights over land, over how to govern, and over what liberty even means.
And right from the get-go, the stakes were just unbelievably high. This whole journey to becoming a nation, it wasn't just about discovery, it was about conquest. As one of our sources puts it, millions died in pursuit of conquering this unknown land. I mean, wow, that really sets a stark tone for the whole story we're about to dive into, right?
And believe it or not, from that incredibly violent beginning, a nation rose up that would one day be called the modern Roman Empire. That's a pretty heavy label, isn't it? It's powerful, it's complicated, it hints at this massive power and global influence, but also, well, maybe it hints at the same kinds of weaknesses that have brought down empires before.
So that really brings us to the core question here. How did this all happen? I mean, what were the key fights, the core conflicts that actually built this nation? And maybe more importantly, what was the price of winning each one?
Okay, so the first major conflict, it was all about the most basic question you can ask. Who's in charge? Who gets to rule? This was the fight for sovereignty, the struggle of 13 colonies trying to break away from, let's be real, the most powerful empire on the planet at the time. And it's wild how quickly things just spiraled out of control. This wasn't just one thing, it was like a rapid-fire series of events. Every new act from Britain, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the colonists saw them as a direct attack on their rights. That famous line, "No taxation without representation," that became their rallying cry. And then you get things like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and boom, that simmering resentment just explodes into all-out war.
And this was the point of no return. July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just some polite letter to the king. No way. It was this incredibly radical statement, this new idea that a people have the right to rule themselves. So the question of sovereignty was answered, on paper at least. Now the real fight was on to see if they could make it a reality.
Okay, so winning the war, that was one thing. An amazing, nearly impossible thing. But building a country from scratch, that's a whole other level of difficulty. The conflict suddenly turned inward. The big question became one of governance. How in the world do you build a government that actually works?
So their first shot at it was something called the Articles of Confederation. And you have to remember they were terrified of a strong central government. That's what they had just fought a war to get away from. So they intentionally created a super weak federal government. It was really more of a league of friendship between the states, where each state basically held all the cards.
Yeah, and that weakness, it became a massive problem fast. When a bunch of unpaid Revolutionary War vets in Massachusetts started an armed uprising, we call it Shays' Rebellion, the national government was completely powerless and couldn't do a thing. This was a huge, terrifying wake-up call. It made everyone realize the whole country was about to fall apart from the inside.
So, because the Articles failed so spectacularly, the founders had to go back to the drawing board. And what they came up with was a total 180. They scrapped the weak articles and created the Constitution, a radical shift to a strong central government that could actually tax people, raise an army, and have the final word. It was a hugely risky and controversial move, and it kicked off arguments about federal versus state power that, let's be honest, we're still having today.
All right, so the government is finally set up. What's next? Well, the next huge conflict was all about territory. The young nation started looking west, and it was driven by this powerful idea that would basically fuel 100 years of nonstop and often really brutal expansion.
And that idea had a name: Manifest Destiny. This was the belief, and it was everywhere, that the United States was literally destined by God to expand all the way across North America, from sea to shining sea. And this wasn't just some government policy. People saw it as a moral duty. And that kind of thinking, well, it's a pretty dangerous justification for what's about to happen.
And the results? I mean, they were just staggering. Just look at this. After just one war, the Mexican-American War, the United States grabbed over 1 million square miles of new territory. 1 million! That's not just gaining land. That's a massive, violent rewriting of the entire map of North America.
But here's the other side of that story. This expansion came at a human cost that is just almost impossible to wrap your head around. Policies from the government like the Indian Removal Act forced over 60,000 Native Americans off the land their families had lived on for generations. For them, this journey west wasn't about opportunity. It was a journey of pure suffering and death. It became known as the Trail of Tears.
And all of this relentless expansion to the west, it forced the country to finally face its biggest, deepest contradiction. It was an issue so toxic, so woven into the fabric of the country's economy and its identity that it would eventually lead to the ultimate showdown, a fight over the future of the Union itself. See, every time a new territory was added, the same question popped up. Is it going to be a free state or a slave state? For decades, they tried to patch things over with compromises, but every single attempt, from the Missouri Compromise to the literal violence of bleeding Kansas, was just kicking the can down the road. It just delayed the inevitable and made things even more tense. And then, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln gets elected, and that was the final spark. The whole thing just broke apart.
Now let's be clear, from the very beginning, the Confederacy was facing a major uphill battle. Just look at the difference. The Union had way more people and way more factories, a massive industrial advantage. The South's only real shot was to win a few quick, decisive battles because they knew a long, drawn-out war would absolutely favor the North's resources.
And the war that followed, it was more brutal than anyone could have possibly imagined. Over 600,000 lives lost. Just think about that number. To this day, it is the deadliest conflict in American history. A war of brother against brother that, yes, saved the Union, but at an absolutely catastrophic price.
So the war finally ends, and then comes the absolutely monumental task of rebuilding. And we're not just talking about cities and buildings, but rebuilding an entire society. This period was called Reconstruction, and it raised all these new and, as it turns out, unanswered questions about the future and the very soul of the nation. And for a brief, truly revolutionary moment, there was so much promise. I mean, 3 constitutional amendments were passed, one right after the other. The 13th abolishes slavery, gone. The 14th grants citizenship and equal protection under the law. The 15th guarantees the right to vote. For a little while there, it really looked like a new, more equal America was rising from the ashes of the war.
But that promise, it was broken. In 1877, a shady political deal, a compromise to settle a messy presidential election, basically killed Reconstruction overnight. The federal troops who'd been in the South protecting the rights of newly freed black citizens, they were pulled out. Just like that. The country's will to keep fighting for equality just fizzled out.
And all of this brings us to a final, really important question. The United States, as we know it, was forged in the fire of these huge conflicts over who's in charge, how to govern, who gets the land, and what holds the country together. The nation we live in today is a direct result of how all those fights ended. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are these big arguments about land, about power, and about liberty, are they ever really, truly over?